Hi, my name's Gabriel Kenny, and this is my hand-in for our des105 assessment. Today I'm going to be showing you my game, Super Space Pusher. I'm going to give you a quick demo of what the game is, how to play it. I'm going to show you how the game runs behind the scene in the code, and at the end I'll give a quick note of what I might do differently, what I might change. So first of all, for the game itself, please note that the sound is going to be off for this recording, just so you can actually hear me. We can start the game there. We've got our lives up here and our score there. We move up and down and we try and shoot these enemy incoming drones. When we shoot them, they float away a little bit and you can still push them with bullets, hence the name Space Pusher. Once the score reaches 15, you get an upgrade to your weapons, like so. You now have another two little kind of shuriken shaped ones bobbing about. And if I now try and let them kill me, which can be quite hard with them dodging about, that's the true difficulty of this game, is the debugging the death sequence. Almost. There you go, and you get a game over screen, thanks for playing, and it lets you know what your final score is as well. We're now going to run over how the player itself is controlled. We start up with a bunch of member variables. We create an array called GameObjectLives, and we set a base position for the position of the life orbs. Within the start, we set the lives to a new game object, life amount. So that's us instantiating the array itself to the length of life amount, which, as you can see up here, is set to 4. We then do a for loop. This is also set to be life amount, so the same amount as the amount of indexes the array has. Within that, we're instantiating game object hearts. We're using the hearts icon. Sorry, I just Control-Z'd that away by accident there. We're using the hearts icon. We're creating a new vector, which is -7 plus I. And I'm making it plus I means that as the for loop runs, by every time, the orbs themselves will move across +1 on the X position, so they're not all on top of each other. And then the rotation, simply quaternion dot identity, so they're just created with their set rotation. We then add these game objects to the array of lives at the position of I, so that's again referencing back to this for loop. We then have live text.position. That's setting the thing which says lives itself, and that's just making sure it's at the right spot at all times in relation to the hearts. Within our updater, we're creating a shot timer, which is time.delta time times 1,000. We're doing times 1,000 to give us a bit more wiggle room, so we don't have to use floats. It's a bit easier on the memory, and this is basically going to increase by a set amount every frame according to time.delta time. Now we're using move, which is going to be a new vector 3. We created move further up here, and now we're actually putting a vector 3 into the space we created up there. Now the X and the Z are both set to 0, but our Y is input.getX is vertical, so that's either the up or down arrow keys or W and S. That's going to move from a negative value of -1 to a positive value of 1 with 0 in the middle, and it's basically going to mean that our Y is going to be going between -1 and 1 depending on what the person's pressing. So we're then going to take the transform.position of our player character, and we're going to add this move vector to it. We're going to multiply that by move speed, which is set up here, which is the speed of the movement, and we're then going to multiply that by time.delta time to make sure it's kind of moving at a set rate. Yeah, so when you're pressing down, the player's going to move down. When you're pressing up, the player's going to move up, pretty much, because that's what it's setting this to. Now, if we're pressing space and the shot timer is above 150, now the shot timer, as you remember, is the time we set up here. And basically, once that reaches over a certain amount of time, in this case 150 between our frames, it's going to activate the fire method. We'll go over afterwards. It's going to reset the shot timer to 0, and it's going to play a sound. Now we're going to go over the sound manager later on. We're also, if the score is above 14, then we're going to add, we're going to make upgrades equals 1, which activates the shurikens. Again, game manager will cover later. For the fire method itself, we have the shot position, which is the position of the ship itself, and then we just add 0.25 on the X to have a slight offset. We're creating the game object bullet, we're instantiating that, and again, we're just using something we connected, we're using the little orb. We're setting the shot position we set here, and again, quaternion.identity. We're now grabbing the rigid body 2D component of the bullet that we placed onto that prefab. We're grabbing its velocity, and we're adding 13 on the X to it, so it's going to consistently move to the right. We're then going to destroy the bullet within 2 seconds just so it doesn't fly off into the endlessness too much. If upgrades equals 1, we're going to be doing something very similar. The instantiation's the same, the velocity's the same, apart from we're also adding 1 and -1 respectively onto the Y, which is what makes them go in angular directions. We're also editing the angular velocity of the rigid body in order to make them rotate. Again, we're going to destroy them, shuriken 2. On collision enter, this is going to activate if anything hits the hitbox, which is on top of the player character. It's going to double check the tag of the thing that hit it. If it's enemy, i.e. one of the drones, we're going to minus the life amount, which is going to make that 1 less than it was. If it's over 0, so if the player isn't dead yet and you've lost a life, if this is activated, then it's going to destroy one of the lives, one of the things within our game objects array at the spot life amount. So that's basically 1 by 1 taking off the 4 orbs we have and just representing the amount of life we have left over. If our life amount is less than or equal to 0, i.e. if the player's died, we're going to play our sound effects, and we're going to set player dead equals true, which is managed in the game manager. And that's our player script. Now jumping into our next script enemy controller. This is the thing that spawns the enemies themselves. We've added a game object drone, which is controlled by this script. We've got a spawn timer of 1, we've got a spawn speed and a score. Now, score is always going to be equal to the score which is set in our game manager instance. Spawn timer is set at the same as before, again, if spawn timer is over a certain amount. Here, however, the thing that it needs to be over is affected by the score times 2, meaning the higher the score, the quicker enemies will spawn. And again, we set a start position. This is randomized on the y-axis. We instantiate it, and we're actually changing its rotation here. The reason I'm doing this in the code instead of within the editor itself is because on the editor itself, I'd already set the rotation, I'd set the prefab, and it just simply seemed easier to do it here instead of there. And again, we're resetting the spawn timer to 0. And that's our enemy spawner. That's our enemy controller script. Next up, we have our drone controller, which controls the enemies themselves. Again, we're setting a bunch of member variables. Within the start itself, we're setting the enemy start position to the position of the drones themselves. We're randomizing the frequency, and we're making sure that the variable me refers to the drone's game object. So not just the script, but the game object the script is attached to. Within the updates, we're again changing the position itself, this time by transform.up instead of an actual input, because it's an automated thing. Transform.up, because we rotated it by 90, transform.up means it's going to be going towards the left, multiplying it by dime.delta time times move speed, so the same as before. What we're also doing here is with transform.position, we're also moving it transform.right, which is going to be up and down, again, due to the rotation. And that's multiplying that by math.sine with the time, the frequency, and the magnitude. And keep in mind the frequency we randomized up here, which means the enemies are going to be moving at randomized speeds, which is going to be set while they're instantiated, as this script runs independently on every drone that's instantiated. Then we have our onCollision enter2D method. This is going to activate if anything collides. We're going to double check whether the thing we're colliding with is the player bullet, because it might also be the player or one of the boundary colliders. We've got if sound manager instances does not equal null. That's there just in case we're debugging and we're running it from a different part of the script and the sound manager hasn't been created yet. We're going to play the sounds, which we'll go over in the sound manager part itself. We're grabbing the components of the rigid body, we're adding angular velocity and force, and this is going to make it rotate and fly towards the left. We're going to add 1 to the score. We're going to destroy the thing that hit us, i.e. one of the bullets. We're going to destroy ourselves, the game object, within 2 seconds, and we're then going to destroy this entire script. And that's the drone controller. We're now going to face the game manager itself. Now this is creating a static instance of it. This is never going to be destroyed. And this is basically what controls the connection between all the different scripts, apart from Sound Manager, which has its own separate instance itself. At the beginning, we're just going to double check whether this instance exists yet. If it doesn't, then we're setting the instance to this instance of the script. If it does exist, we're going to destroy this entire script, or this instance of this script. We're then going to quickly just connect to the score text, which is a thing at the top of the screen here, which presents the score to the player. We're going to tell it not to destroy this script on load, which means it's going to exist throughout scene changes. Within the update, we're going to update the score text. Again, that's this, to display the correct score. we're going to say that if the player's dead, we're going to load the scene game over. We're then going to set the player dead to false. Otherwise, it's going to be repeatedly running this script. Pardon me, which would not work. We can get rid of the entire awake function, which we no longer need. We've got our method of add score, which simply adds however much you're passing into it to it. The only time that's used is by the drone controller, which adds in 1. And that's the game manager. Next up, we have the sound manager. We've connected a bunch of audio sources. One is the effects source and one's music source. Again, we're creating an instance and we're doing the same thing we did with the game manager and also making sure it doesn't destroy on load. We've got 2 methods within this. We have play single and rand SFX. Now, play single just takes in a single audio clip, sets the clip to be the clip within this method, and then plays that clip. Very simple, just if you want to play a single clip without any funny business. Next, we have random SFX, which takes in some parameters and is going to detect how many parameters is passed in and set this array according to that. And we're calling these clips. We're setting an int called random index. This is going to be random between 0 and the length of this array. We've got random pitch, which is going to set between lowest pitch and highest pitch, which are variables which we set within the editor itself. We then set the audio source's pitch to be random pitch. We set the clip to be a random clip from within this array set by this int, and then we'll play that. And that's the sound manager. So it's activated by things like within the player controller. We have the sound manager.instance.randsfx, FireFX, SFX1 and SFX2. That's going to randomly select between these two, randomize the pitch, and then play it immediately afterwards. Finally, for the smaller scripts at the end, we have the backwall manager. It has a trigger on trigger enter 2D, which destroys anything that enters the triggers connected to this object, which is just these larger triggers outside of the scene. Ensures that the enemies do definitely get deleted no matter what happens to them within the game. We have the score manager, which manages within the game over. The screen, this title saying this text is not working, mate, which is our little debug text. That will turn into score equals whatever the player's score was on death. And then we have the start button, which is used in the main menu, which is this. And that's simply, if it's clicked, then we activate load scene. So on click add listener load scene, we're going to activate that. Scene manager, we're going to load the main scene, which loads the main game. It should also be noted that within the game itself, for both this entry and the game itself, we also have a particle system running in the background, and that's where that's coming from. If I were to add anything to my game, I'd love to add more enemies. I have some sprites for more, and I actually created the prefab for one of them with an animation. I added this chap with animated fumes. I'd love to have him come in, maybe shoot things at the player, add maybe another more randomized level of difficulty. Otherwise, I'm fairly happy with how it all came out. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.